Here's something interesting for those of you who think the Enforcer and Jake Bro and the Silicone Curtain, all those guys know what they're talking about. This is, by the way, I hate MSNBC, but just listen to this for a second. You'll see what I mean.
As Ukraine has really lost considerable leverage in the last couple of months, and Russia launched, major strikes against Iranian infrastructure and energy supplies over the weekend.
There you go. Even MSNBC, she's been around forever, admitting Ukrainian defeat, basically. Now, let's listen to Barry McCaffrey. God bless him. He's been around here for a long time. But I do got to push back a little bit on this, because I don't think they're presenting you with the real reality here. Let's just listen to this.
Well, look, the situation is grim for the Ukrainians. They're fighting literally for their survival against a mass Russian criminal offensive. The Russians are targeting civilian infrastructure. They're using DPICM munitions against civilian targets. They brought in what could turn out to be 100,000 North Koreans eventually. They're using...
I have to just say, I haven't heard anyone say 100,000 North Koreans. That's really not the point of this video. Let's keep going.
Iranian produced drones. China's giving them some minimal support. So it's a very difficult situation. I think you could argue that the Biden administration, in its closing hours, is adding one small factor that might help in the negotiations to end the war when the Trump administration comes in. And it's also responding, obviously, to the hypocrisy of the Russians. But as you suggest, even though ATACMS is a ferociously effective weapon, a 300-kilometer range, it could start now targeting Russian attack helicopter positions, fixed-wing aircraft, artillery that are attacking Ukraine. Even though it has military value, it's too little, too late.
And John Brennan, let's talk about North Korea and the resources there.
Okay, I gotta unpack a little bit here for a second. You hear, like, I give them props for the first part. At least they're admitting Ukraine's basically done with, which we've been saying that for literally months on my channel. Unfortunately, we're just a small percentage of the 99% who says Ukraine, cheerleaders are going to win. They're going to win. That's not going to happen. But the part I got to push back here on is just the word ATACMS. Ukraine for months have already been using ATACMS in Ukraine. I'm not exactly sure. I just made a video mentioning this a few minutes ago. Much longer. I don't know exactly. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, today we woke up with the news that the Biden administration has lifted restrictions on Ukraine concerning using ATACMS and targeting Russian places in Russia. But they were already able to target places across the border in Russia with ATACMS months ago, and had been doing this for months now. To the extent that they have ATACMS, they haven't ever been given that many ATACMS. How it basically was basically this: if you saw Russia building up troops across the border on the other side in Russian territory, and you were fearing they were going to be a counteroffensive coming your way, Biden had eventually gave them permission to use ATACMS, like ATACMS cluster munitions on those positions. So they've already been using them. Matter of fact, all these long-range attacks that you've seen recently that aren't called drones have essentially been ATACM munition strikes, cluster munition strikes. They have a variety. Matter of fact, that one that killed like the 400, 500, 600 Russian troops many, many months ago was believed to be an American cluster munition. So don't know exactly what they mean about ATACMS. All I can tell you is when you listen to MSNBC here, they make it sound like this is a new development that Russia or that Ukraine can finally use ATACMS. And I'm just saying that's not true. They've already been using ATACMS. Concerning Biden specifically, into the news we woke up today, maybe what this is signaling is Biden is willing to give them the longer range ATACMS, the one they're talking about here that can go up to like 190 miles, or maybe a variation of the 190 mile one. Because let's face it, they had already been using ATACMS for a long time, and even months ago it was already believed that they were using the 190 mile ATACMS. So I'm just trying to figure out exactly what it is they believe here, think is happening, because these guys, the way they frame it, right? All these people, not the two girls up the top, but McCaffrey and whoever the news chick is and Brennan here, the way they're framing it is that this is a new ability as Biden's leaving office, and it's not a new ability. Once again, they've already been using ATACMS for months. I'm just curious to know, it's the devil's in the details, they say. I want to know what the detail is. What is different about this restriction being used? Are they giving them a longer version of ATACMS in terms of range? Are they increasing the Russian territory side as an all for game targeting area for the ATACMS? That's what I'm kind of interested in. And by the way, at the end of the day, none of this matters because Ukraine's manpower is too low to basically, unless America's Air Force comes in and just levels Russia's forces for Ukraine, there is no path for them forward in terms of winning the war in the way they want to win the war. I would say there's almost no chance going into the winter of 2024 we're heading into that they will even hold on to Kursk, and they're going to continue to lose the big cities in eastern Ukraine where the main Russian army is. Okay, let's listen a little more here.
North Korea could provide, as Barry McCaffrey just said, endless supplies of personnel to back up Russia.
Well, they've already supplied a fair amount of munitions and weapon systems to Russia since Russian stocks have run short. But it's these troops now.
Most of the munitions given by North Korea were artillery shells, and I think it went into the hundreds of thousands. I think like plus 500,000. As you know, North Korea has the largest standing artillery force of any country in the world. When I was in high school, and I'm 42 now, it was estimated at one time they had 15,000 artillery pieces, which is just amazing. They used to say when I was in high school, they did not believe if Ukraine came across the border and attacked South Korea with that many artillery pieces. They used to say things that American troops would be nothing more than a speed bump on the way to capturing Seoul. I don't know if they still believe that now, but that's used to be what they said. So to give you an idea, they have a ton of artillery. Okay, let's listen a little longer here.
Thousands supposedly have been amassed to launch this counteroffensive in the Kursk region, and many more tens of thousands could in fact show up afterward. So I do think the Biden administration is trying to help the Ukrainians blunt this counteroffensive so that the Ukrainians can hold on to some of this Russian territory in Kursk. Because if there's going to eventually be some type of negotiations, I think the Ukrainians have always hoped that there would be a trade of land for land, so they could agree to get out of the Kursk region if Russia agreed to get out of the eastern portion of Ukraine that they've occupied.
I do want to point something out here. I do believe, by the way, Brennan's right on this. I think that's why Ukraine a few months ago launched that Kursk operation and got real lucky and was able to capture that land. Russia, if you don't know, has already taken back a considerable amount of that Kursk land, and even at its highest amount of land they took, which I think was close to 100 miles or something, 100 square miles or something like that. The part he's talking about, comparing to eastern Ukrainian land that Russia has captured, Kursk is just a tiny chunk of land compared to that land. I don't know how many Russia Kursk you could fit inside the eastern Ukraine, but at least the part that's controlled by Ukraine, it's got to be more than five times the Kursk that Ukraine currently occupies could fit inside the conquered eastern parts of eastern Ukraine, if that makes sense. So I don't think there's much of a trade value there anyway. Matter of fact, it's so lopsided, it could be very well that Russia's like, hey, we'll keep all your mining area that we conquered in Ukraine because that's more valuable to us than the Kursk, and you keep the Kursk area. After all, remember, by the time Russia got troops organized and stopped the counteroffensive of Ukraine into their own territory, Ukraine was never able to capture all of the Kursk territory. It's a territory inside of Russia, and I mean, I think they captured less than 50% of it. So, okay, let's just listen more. You get what I'm saying. If the brain, but that thing between your two ears is working right, you understand what I'm saying.
But I do think it's a last-ditch effort on the part of the Biden administration to do what they can to be able to provide Ukraine some additional capability where they can strike troop concentrations, weapons depots, munition arsenals, and other areas inside of Russia. And it is rather rich, and as General McCaffrey said, rather the height of hypocrisy, that Russia claims that this is an escalation, while Russia has been escalating this war over the last 2+ years.
And John Brennan and General McCaffrey, before we move on, I also want to ask both of you about NBC News, Courtney Kube reporting over the weekend, her team, that the new transition team is considering courts martial and reactivating people like General Milley and also going against all of the generals who are on the ground in Kabul for that admittedly disastrous withdrawal. General McCaffrey, first to you. What is your posture towards court-martialing some of these generals, including 4 stars?
Well, I think legally it's going to go nowhere. There's just no precedent for this. You can bring back retired military personnel.
Yeah, I agree with General Barry McCaffrey here. This is weird. And this ain't coming out of Trump's mouth. This is some news article reporting this to maybe be true. But yeah, I can't imagine legally that's going to fly because Milley's been, I don't even know, you'd have to go back and Google, but Milley's now been retired for, I'm pretty sure, more than 2 years now. And not to mention, a big part of the disaster, and I am a Republican, a big part of that disaster, although Trump didn't have anything to do with what Biden ultimately did, that was Biden, but Trump has a big part to do with the overall leaving Afghanistan. I didn't like it as a Republican when he was announcing that he wanted to cut the losses and leave Afghanistan. I mean, as we speak today, Al Qaeda, if you do reading, Al Qaeda is starting to take over Afghanistan again, including defeating the Taliban who took over the government. It's starting to happen all over again. It didn't take very long. This is why there should have never been a drawdown in Afghanistan, because it was important to keep. If you didn't want, I mean, if you don't care if there's a terrorist state, then you don't care. There's nothing I can say about that. But if you're a rational thinker, there should have never been a drawdown, because Afghanistan's becoming a terrorist state again, and we don't need a terrorist state. We spent all that money to keep it from being a terrorist state, and unfortunately the blood, which you can't replace the humans that were lost there, and now it's becoming a terrorist state again. But anyway, let's listen to what they say here.
Committed a civil crime years ago while they were in active duty. This is utter nonsense. What isn't utter nonsense is this is a political attack of utmost hypocrisy. Trump ran for office saying get out of Afghanistan. He reduced the troop presence to 2,500. He negotiated directly with the Taliban. And Biden, in a legitimate political objective, came into office saying he was going to withdraw from Afghanistan. So there are 2,500 troops on the ground. We had to give up the major air base. We were in a bowl around Kabul. The evacuation from a tactical military viewpoint was a brilliant success. I thought it might be Dien Bien Phu. They put 7 battalions on the ground. U.S. Air Force appeared with B-52, B-1 bombers. We got out of there with 100,000 Afghan civilians fleeing with us. So it's just the world turned upside down.
He's right, the world is turned upside down. But it's how Biden left is the problem. Trump plays a big part in this, but Biden is the man. The initial withdrawal, as you heard him say, was perfectly fine. There was no one left. But when he took all the pressure from all the Americans that said, hey, you left all these interpreters and their families and all these people back in Afghanistan, and now the Taliban's hunting them down, executing their family. Anyway, it's how it all unfolded. If you recall, the difference here being that Joe Biden ordered the military airplanes while they were in air to literally turn back around and land at the Air Force Base again. The difference this time was when they landed at the Air Force Base, the Taliban army was already in charge of the Air Force Base. They were already on the ground in the Air Force Base. When they left, there was nobody, no Taliban on the ground. When they came back, there was Taliban's army on the ground, which ultimately left the 13 Americans losing their life in that suicide bomb. And that's why it was a complete disaster. That and that alone. Let's listen on here.
I think it's going nowhere, but it's a disaster signal to the armed forces. They're also talking about review boards, vetting the 3- and 4-star flag officers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, firing the chairman of the JCS, who I might add was promoted to 4 stars by Trump. This is a terrible beginning to an administration.
I understand their concern, and I think most of what he's talking about is true. It's a bad idea, but here's the thing. The military needs a house cleaning right now, because, hang on for a second. Whoa. Listen, the military, unfortunately, like the FBI and CIA, has become essentially penetrated by the deep state. It's not an opinion, it's just fact. And matter of fact, there's guys in the military right now, guys and gals, and transgender for that matter, who are there today for no other reason than EDI. That's it. They're there for EDI purposes. There's people who have been promoted inside the military who are just civilians. They never went to boot camp. But they're in charge of gigantic swaths of the military that they have no business being in charge of. And there is a big part of that problem, as, like I said, the deep state penetrators that are in there today. It needs to be cleaned. I don't know if Trump has the answer, but to pretend like it doesn't need to be cleaned out, which I feel like Barry's doing here, by own opinion, is ridiculous. It needs a house clean. The way Trump wants to do it, I'm not saying if that's the right way to go about it, but it needs a sweep. A big time sweeping. Look, the military needs to get back to what the military is there for. Defense of the country. That's it. We don't need exclusivity of women more than men soldiers. We don't need to be paying for men and women who are confused about their gender. If they're confused about their gender, they don't even need to be in the military. They're mentally unfit, which goes right against the article of the military to start with. Right? We need to do a deep, deep clean here. I don't know if Trump's way is the best way, but it needs to happen. Okay, let's just listen here and we'll be done.
And John Brennan, there's also lots of reporting, including our own, that the military wanted to keep 2,500 troops there and not shut Bagram as precipitously as it was. And it was the political advisors and the national security advisors and the president himself who said, no, draw down.
Yeah, the U.S. military is one of the most esteemed and respected organizations, I think, worldwide. And it does follow the orders of the civilian leaders of this government. And so they were carrying out the orders. And it was pointed out that it was Donald Trump who first initiated this withdrawal by giving a date certain to the Taliban when U.S. military forces would leave. And the U.S. military expressed their concerns, a number of people expressed their concerns. But in good military order, they...
Just remember, America is the only country that I know of in the world that the United States president is commander-in-chief. He's commander-in-chief. He is a civilian general, basically. He could literally have been in the military and knows what he's doing. But what I'm saying is, he is a civilian general. He has the ultimate say. And how this normally works is, this is a part of all the administration stuff, is you set advisors in there. And all your defensive counsel, they're linked into the military. And then inside of the military, you have the Joint Chief of Staffs, and they're connected to that political apparatus that goes inside the White House. And they share their thoughts and recommendations. Most of the time, it's not even their ideas. It's the people who are on the ground that they entrust for basically correct information and assessment. Now, the thing about America's military is it's a free country, so there's a lot of people who have the ranking, right, that can that will share their advice, but it's only a certain amount of those people that they're interested in. So you might have 100 people, you might have 50 people say this and 50 people think that, and then of course ultimate administration will make its decision. But generally, whatever the Joint Chiefs Staff thinks is the most solid way forward, that's the one they tell the administration. It's basically how that communication line works. But like I said, I'm a Republican, and I know all too well that Donald Trump was a big part of that failure in Afghanistan his first term. My only point is, Biden didn't have to execute it. It was within his right not to execute it, and he chose to execute. And how he executed, regardless of what Trump's negotiations were or weren't, it was up to them to execute a sound drawdown, which, like I said a few minutes ago, didn't happen. The initial drawdown went fine. Everybody was home safe, flying back, but then there was 2 or 3 cargo planes with United States Marines inside those cargo planes that in mid-air was told to turn the plane around and go land at Bagram again. And that's when the shit show happened, because when they returned a few hours later, when those planes returned, the Afghanistan army had now taken over the base. There were still some remnants of, like, I think the Airborne Division and some guys like that, but the majority of the force left there was Marines once they turn around and put boots back on the ground. It was a clusterfuck of massive proportions. All right. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.